there is this contestation between NATO allies and Russia right across Europe. And we see it in terms of poisonings, we see it in terms of undersea cables being impacted, we see it in air bases, we see it in expulsions of spies, right across the spectrum. There are a series of activities going on between sub-threshold military activities going on between Western nations and Russia. And these could be the precursors to a proper conflict. And so that is something that we want to be ready for if it comes.
Dozens of British troops have been sent to US Air Force bases across the UK to protect them from drone attacks. Drones were spotted flying near bases in Suffolk and Norfolk. Russian involvement has not been ruled out. Joining us now is Mike Martin, Lib Dem MP, member of the Defence Select Committee and Joint Committee on National Security. Good morning to you.
Morning.
So dozens of British troops being sent. What do we know? Do we have any more detail about the frequency of these drones, the number of them?
No, we don't. Just what we've seen in the news. There were some reports last week and then again yesterday of a small number of drones flying over these US air bases. I think we need to sort of look at the full spectrum of options here. It could be everything from kids messing around, right? I mean, that does happen, right, all the way through to the other end of the spectrum, which is an act by a hostile power, probably Russia. One assumes Russia. And
will we ever get to the bottom of this, do you think? Because, there have been previous sightings of drones and it feels like there was never any conclusive proof about what they were, where they came from. And I don't know, do you have any faith actually that you'll be able to kind of pinpoint where these came from?
Yeah, I don't think that's a particularly difficult issue. You can, track the flight path and look at where it's come from. And obviously these are controlled by remote control. So you can look at the electromagnetic spectrum and see exactly where they're being controlled from. So that's not really the issue from my perspective. And actually, I think the incident, if this were a hostile power, links to something much wider and something that we've been speaking about on the Defence Select Committee, which is how ready is the UK to defend itself, and whether that's putting land forces in Europe or defending air bases at home. There are huge gaps in UK capability that we really need to get to grips with.
And explain how that works then, because in terms of protecting us, what are we protecting ourselves from? I think, a lot of people, it's quite a leap for them to go from, drones being spotted flying to some kind of attack. So what are all the steps in between those two?
Well, specifically, this obviously drones being flown over would not be an attack, but before you attack something, you need to gather information. And so these flights could be as a way of probing and testing how we respond. They could be a way of understanding the layout of the air bases. There are lots of things that could be happening here. But I think there's a wider point. I think you said people, might struggle to link this up. The wider point is that effectively Britain and its allies in Europe are engaged in below threshold warfare with Russia across Europe at the moment. Of course, the Ukrainians on our behalf, with our equipment, are fighting the Russians in Ukraine. And the British public perhaps don't understand the degree to which we are in a confrontation with Russia. And so when we talk about attacks on infrastructure, or whether we need to put more forces in Europe, that is something that might come about very, very, very quickly. And if we're not prepared to do that, and it takes many years to prepare to do these things, and we can't do it when we need to do it, that's going to cause us huge, huge problems.
And you said at the beginning of the interview that, it could be Russia, or it could be kids, or it could be anything in between. And there'll be some people who perhaps more informed on this stuff, who do understand about the kind of, recent green light for Storm Shadow missiles, that will say that actually that's perhaps they can draw a conclusion from the timing of this. Would you do that?
Impossible to speculate. What is definitely going on is that there is this contestation between NATO allies and Russia right across Europe, and we see it in terms of poisonings, we see it in terms of undersea cables being impacted, we see it in air bases, we see it in expulsions of spies, right across the spectrum. There are a series of activities going on between sub-threshold military activities going on between Western nations and Russia, and these are the could be the precursors to a proper conflict, and so that is something that we want to be ready for if it comes.
But you think we're not ready?
We're absolutely not ready. So last Thursday we had the Secretary of State for Defence in front of the Defence Select Committee, and we discussed specific things, and I've asked the Secretary of State for Defence this as well in the chamber. There are certain things that we should be doing or should be able to do in terms of the forces that we give to NATO. And of course, our defence relies very heavily on NATO, and we're simply not able to do those things. And that's a huge problem.
Well, it sounds indeed like it is. Mike Martin, thank you very much for talking to us. That is Mike Martin. He's the Lib Dem MP, member of the Defence Select Committee and Joint Committee on National Security.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Just one quick item to pass along at the top, and then I'll be happy to take your questions. Jennifer, is that they are being actively monitored. Installation leaders have determined so far that none of these incursions impact the base residents, the facilities, or the assets that we have on those bases. We're, of course, continuing to work with host nation authorities and our mission partners to ensure the safety of our personnel, our facilities, and the equipment. The bottom line is it's something that we're going to take seriously. We're continuing to look into it, but as of right now has not had any significant mission impact. Again, this is something that we'll look into. As you know, small UASs, drones, have become something that's, relatively common now across the landscape. It's something that the department has been looking closely at in terms of how it applies to our facilities, our personnel, whether it's in combat zones or outside of combat zones. But in terms of these particular incidents in the UK versus the ones in the States, again, I don't want to speculate that there's any connection.
They don't appear to be those of hobbyists. Is that correct?
Again, it would be, premature to draw any conclusions. We've got to see what these are. I mean, it's entirely possible that it could be hobbyists or something else. We just got to look into it. So. Thanks very much, everybody. Appreciate it.